Hello everyone and welcome to GRcast Season 2, Episode 3. I am Joe Ryan, your host, and joining me this week we have Matt Growcott.
Hello.
And Allison Hill.
Heyo.
This week the topic on tap is horror games. Now I know you guys are super excited because they just announced they are going to be remastering the GameCube cut of Resident Evil 1 for, I believe it's coming out for PC, PS4, and Xbox One as a full 1080 awesome experience, and then it's also coming out for PS3 and Xbox 360 at 720p, and not out for Wii U at all because screw Wii U, I guess.
Or Vita.
Is that gonna frustrate anybody? Do you think that it's not coming out for Wii U, or do you think average Wii U gamer doesn't care?
They brought the Revelations to Wii U, didn't they? So I presume that no one bought it, else they'd have released Resident Evil 1 on there as well. Although the whole Nintendo link, it's surprising that it's not going to be on the Wii U just because it was originally a GameCube game and it was exclusive. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys played that GameCube re-release of that game, but I thought it was good. I thought it was fantastic. I don't know that I ever actually finished the original PlayStation 1 version of Resident Evil, but the GameCube one was excellent, in my opinion, anyway.
I have not played the GameCube version.
it was good, and graphics for the time were fantastic as well. I don't think they're really upping the graphics much other than resolution-wise. They're fixing some textures, I think. So it's not going to look like a PS4 game, but it's still going to be pretty good. And anything, they're re-releasing a GameCube game, so we might get the Twin Snakes at some point, which would be fantastic.
That would be pretty cool, actually. I would, I sort of I think a lot of people had a fit about the Twin Snakes because they added a lot of the different things, like the looking down the barrel of the gun and everything. They thought it made it too easy. But I actually read that this Resident Evil version, they're getting away from the fixed camera. They're going to do a little bit more of a dynamic camera. They're going to fix some of the controls up. So it's probably going to be, I would think, fairly different from the experience we've had before, especially if they're changing the whole stop and pivot control scheme thing that they've always done, because I don't know how scary that game's going to be if you can actually move and get away from enemies.
The best thing is about it, and it's how everyone who does remasters or remakes should approach their game, is that they're giving you the choice. The dynamic camera that you mentioned is a result of it now being in widescreen. It's not so much that it's dynamic, it's just that they're showing so much of the screen that they're focusing on a certain bit, and when you move up, it's still the same screen, but it's moving the camera up with you rather than showing the whole thing at once as it did on the PS1 or whatever, the GameCube. So, but they're also giving you the chance to play it in the original letterbox format. And with the controls, they're getting rid of the tank ones, but they also give you the chance to play it like that if you want to. So really, they're just trying to do everything for everyone.
I like that they let you keep the original ones if you want. That's a good move.
Yeah, I feel like they can make that a trophy then, if you can do it in letterbox and you can do it with the original controls, because there are some people who aren't going to have the patience, I think, to play it the way it was quote unquote meant to be played. But as far as horror games, how much do you guys think that the sort of disability built into the controls or whatever else is what creates the horror atmosphere? Like Resident Evil wasn't that scary of a game, except that when you saw a monster, you would hear him off screen, he's moaning about something, you don't know where he is, and then you walk around a corner and he's right next to you, and you have to take 5 minutes to turn around and run away or whatever. Is that do you think that's all that made that game scary, was you actually had to work to control the person to get away?
I remember having a official PlayStation magazine or something from the time Resident Evil came out, and basically the guy reviewing it or whatever just was so excited about the visuals. He was like, finally a game that looks like a film. And you see pictures or whatever now. They showed a little bit of footage from the original PS1 version in the reveal trailer or something for this Resident Evil, and they're like featureless blobs, the original characters. So I think a lot of it was just how young everyone was and how young the format was, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think the controls did have a part in it because you couldn't move while shooting. You had it was like they had to make a game where it's not like today where you can have a million zombies on screen at once. So it's like when they had one zombie on screen, they had to make it scary somehow. So I think, it's part of it. But yeah, I agree with Matt where it's like back then that was like top of the notch graphics, and it was just like it was scary because of that as well.
In the original Resident Evil, and maybe maybe the first 3 Resident Evil games, I feel like the design was pretty well done, because you look at the difference between, like, the original Resident Evil, you're stuck in that mansion for the most part, and there's a lot of, like, tight corners and things that they can stick people behind to make it kind of scary. But if you contrast that with Silent Hill, which I also think is a good game, but a lot of that game was like big open spaces, and it's just like there's fog everywhere. We need fog to obscure what's going on, because otherwise, if you can see everything, it's not that scary. And, with the technical limitations, they couldn't have that much crazy draw distance going on the PS1. But I feel like they were both kind of scary in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, Silent Hill, those are like my favorite games of all time. Specifically the second one, but I thought it was really smart how they used the fog to obscure, and I think having wide open spaces is a different kind of scary because you'll hear an enemy, but you have no idea which direction it's going to come from. And, unlike the zombies, there were several enemies that would move pretty fast. And, like, I remember, I can't remember which one, if it was the first one or the second one, there was the guys that crawled on the ground, and they would come out from underneath cars and just shoot out in front of you, and it was the most terrifying thing.
The other interesting thing about the comparison between Silent Hill and Resident Evil is that Silent Hill and other games like it at the time were trying new and exciting things, and Capcom really got stuck on this idea of fixed camera tank controls, and I think they stopped being scary. They stopped being as interesting. The GameCube version of Resident Evil 1, which everyone says was the most amazing version of that game, it sold 1.4 million copies or something like that. Code Veronica across PS2 and Dreamcast sold like 3 million copies, and the series really kind of nosedived before the films came out and before Resident Evil 4, mainly because other companies were doing better things.
So if you had to pick which, Allison, you said Silent Hill is one of your favorite series, so I'm going to guess you would go Silent Hill over Resident Evil. How about you, Matt? Which, do you have a preference between the two? Or I know you're not a huge horror game guy anyway, but is there one series you were like, I just like this one better than the other?
I liked Resident Evil more as a kid, but I think that's because there was so much of it. You had Resident Evil 3 with with Nemesis walking around with a giant rocket launcher and all that. And I think I was probably too young to get the subtleties of Silent Hill. It's more story based rather than Resident Evil's kind of cheesy gags, but not able to control as well.
I sort of feel like I have always preferred Resident Evil, but I think I might just like Resident Evil better as a game and Silent Hill better as like a scary experience. Resident Evil's not even scary anymore. It's just a game. It's like a Call of Duty with zombies or something, or not even zombies. It's just Call of Duty with people who've got the bad flu. Also, have you guys seen recent news reports about crazy Ebola outbreaks in Africa? I played Resident Evil 5, guys. I know what's going on. It's zombie things.
It's kind of terrifying.
Ebola is one of the few totally awesome murderous viruses that's not airborne. It has to be transmitted by fluids, like, say, a bite. I'm just saying.
Oh, boy.
God, you spent all these years planning for the zombie apocalypse, eh, Joe?
Yeah, finally all my knowledge will be put to good use.
That's why he's in a closet.
Definitely. I've got all my supplies in here. I locked my family out. They'll just slow me down when the zombies arrive. So, here's my thought on horror games. The scariest idea that I can think of off the top of my head was Silent Hill: The Room. I don't know why, but the idea of being trapped in this room and having a portal to crazy Silent Hill land that sort of slowly infected your mind or the room or whatever the hell it was, I liked that idea so much, and I was so disappointed that the game was not that scary.
I still have to play that one. I've kind of stayed away from it just because of, the reviews of it and stuff, but I feel like I still want to play it just to see the experience. Just to play it, just 'cause.
I think it would be worth it, especially since you're a Silent Hill fan anyway. Like, I don't know that it's really any worse than any other Silent Hill game. You'll probably think it's pretty good. I don't know, there's something about being trapped. I don't remember if the character in that game was trapped by someone or if he was trying to keep something out, and that's why he was staying in there. But the idea of it was really
he
neat.
was trapped. Yeah, I think, well, part of the reason why it didn't do so well was because it changed so much what Silent Hill was. Like, they got rid of a lot of things, like, that were iconic to the series. Like, I think, like, the radio that, like, would have, like, static when enemies are nearby and stuff. I think they ditched that entirely. Like, they ditched a bunch of stuff, and people were like, this isn't Silent Hill anymore, sort of. But yeah, he like woke up and like there were just chains all over his door, and he was like, I can't get out. And then portals opened up and stuff started happening. But I already spoiled the game for myself because I just wanted to learn the story, so I know like how it ends and everything. And the story itself is actually pretty good. It's just the game itself just didn't stick with the right formula, I guess. Maybe if you look at it as not a Silent Hill game, it'll be good, but I'm not really sure. I'll have to play it.
Did you ever play that one, Matt, or did you just skip most Silent Hill games?
I've seen most of them, I'll be honest. I saw Kim play the second and the third one, but I wasn't really bothered by them when the PS2 came around. So I played the first quite a lot when I was a kid, and then didn't even realize how many had come out for years and years and years until they released the HD collection. And that franchise, they've milked that franchise, haven't they? There's so many of them.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, for a long time they were just trying to get that name on anything. It was a pretty good brand for a while, and now, I mean, do they even make any anymore? I don't feel like there's any in the works that I know of.
Yeah, I was really disappointed with their newest one. I was so looking forward to it. I even like pre-ordered it because I wanted to like support them and show like, yay, Silent Hill, and then I got it, and there were certain parts that were really good, like actually all the side missions, like the optional stuff was really good, and then like the rest of the game was just, eh.
I think part of the problem is that that kind of filmic, story-driven horror game that freaked us out when we were 10 years old and then 15 years old or whatever, they can't do that anymore. They've tried to move away with it with the Resident Evil franchise because they've tried to make it more like the films, which were super successful and which saved the franchise. And it just doesn't work anymore to do it in that format. You look at the biggest horror games of the last few years, you're thinking of like Amnesia and things like that, or even that it was a little like flash game, I think, where you had to go around getting the Slender Man. That was it. Things
Oh
like
yeah.
that there's no plot to. They're just pure kind of jumpy. I know there's a plot to Amnesia, but it's not the focus. You're not going from cutscene to cutscene like you were with Resident Evil or with Silent Hill.
So, as far as like horror games in general, in the past, I feel like, and this is sort of, I might be generalizing a little bit, or maybe this is too brief to tell the whole story, but they kind of started out with adventure games. You've got like, off the top of my head, I'm thinking of like Seventh Guest and Phantasmagoria. I'm sure there's more that were like sort of horror games. And then they had like that game Sweet Home on the Famicom that Shinji Mikami sort of loosely based Resident Evil on. And then it was Alone in the Dark. That was like the first what we think of as survival horror games, and it was garbage as far as I'm concerned. And then Resident Evil kind of kicked it off into high gear. But I feel like the heyday of survival horror games was sort of PS1, PS2 era. Especially PS2, you had all the Resident Evils. You had tons of Silent Hill. You had Clock Tower, Fatal Frame. I mean, there's probably tons I'm not even thinking of. And then they've kind of died off. Now, like you were saying, horror games are kind of like an indie enterprise. But do you think that some of the good games we've got, like Outlast and that sort of stuff coming out, and the other ones are more disappointing, like Daylight. But do you think horror games are kind of having a resurgence, or do you think it's just always going to be the kind of thing where it's like Joe and Allison play it, they'll sell 2 copies, but everybody else doesn't give a shit?
Indie games are getting popular. I think that's part of it. I don't think that it's necessarily that horror games are getting big again. It's more that indie games are. There's suddenly a ton of places you can read about them. There's suddenly places they can advertise. They're getting onto these stores because it's costing less and they're getting more support from the developers. The people that grew up with Resident Evil and Silent Hill are now old enough to be making their own games, and they've got all the help to do it. So, digital stores and that sort of thing are helping the horror genre come back to a certain extent, but it's mostly through the people that are making them and the allowances that being an indie developer gives them, that they're coming back.
I also feel like if a AAA studio makes a horror game, first off, the audience is going to have a higher expectation than an indie game because it's a AAA game. It's going to cost $60, and because it's a game where it's physical, they have to worry about a bunch of more costs. So they have to try to fit in a lot more stuff to make the game good. And then I feel like they probably just overdo it, and then it becomes something like Resident Evil where it just becomes all about more actiony and about shooting things, where it's like you can't. I feel like it's a lot easier to sell a horror game now at a lower price because it's like the smaller experiences is where its niche is right now. I feel like, or something like that. I don't know where I'm going with
this. Well, to the point about indie games, I sort of feel like I don't know how much listeners or you guys have really followed like the early horror film industry or really just early directorial debuts of people, but a lot of people, I'm thinking mostly of like Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, these guys from like the sort of late 70s time, when they started making movies, they made horror movies because often they were cheaper, and because, I mean, you don't really need great acting, you just need somebody to scream, and then you have to pay a bunch of money for like buckets of blood or whatever, and then often it's scarier when you don't show some crazy rubber-suited monster, you just do whatever. So I sort of wonder if that's part of the indie game thing too. Like, it is difficult when you're playing a game, I think, to make someone feel like joyful or like, any positive emotion. It's really difficult compared to if you're making an indie game, you think horror game because most of the game can be dark, so it doesn't have to look that good, and you don't have to show that much at once. And it's not that hard to scare people. All you need is them creeping through the dark with a flashlight and anything. Like you could hit a discordant piano note, creaking of a board, like a wolf howl, anything that can just make a person feel a little uneasy, that they're going to go, holy shit, this is terrifying, compared to trying to make them feel some like transcendent joy or whatever, where you would need a crazy budget or some really good writers. So that might be sort of why people are gravitating towards that in the indie scene.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There are a few kind of big budget attempts going on though, aren't there? There's is it The Evil Within?
Yes.
They're working on that.
I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful.
Do you know whether they're kind of retaining the puzzle gameplay from the Resident Evil games? Because that would kill it for me, I think.
I actually haven't been following it. The last that I heard of was when it was at PAX East, and I was there, but I didn't actually go see the game because the lines are forever long. But I was hearing the buzz around that was that people were very disappointed because not in the game itself, but of the main protagonist, because he wasn't reacting to anything. Like it was like, oh, it's a scary thing, okay. Like it didn't feel realistic because he was just like, there was no reaction. There was no like, oh shit or anything. It was just kind of like he was flat. So I'm really hoping they fix that, but I didn't really hear anything else. So
that's such a Resident Evil thing, though, isn't it? That is, it makes me laugh that people expected more almost, because everyone's been going for 15 years. They need to make more traditional Resident Evil games like I used to not buy when I was a kid, apparently, because the sales dropped off. And now they're finally doing it, and it's going to be protagonists that are so obviously heroes in a computer game, and hopefully not, but possibly puzzle gameplay where you have to walk across huge areas just to put a stone in another stone's mouth or whatever. And these aren't scary things. And I think it's going to take a big failure for people to realize that maybe the genre needs updating. We just don't want to go back to what it was.
I feel like with that game, apart from the stuff out of packs, they've been playing their cards pretty close to the chest, which is probably wise. All of the like commercials and things I see for it is just like they have a camera on a person who's playing the game, and then the person freaks out about something they see on the screen, and it's about 20 of those, and then it says the evil within. Pretty much the only thing they have really come out and said about it is Shinji Mikami, the creator of the Resident Evil series, returns to his roots with a game just like Resident Evil or whatever. And, I mean, that's whipping people into a frenzy, but then, as you say, some people play it and they go, wait a minute, there's a reason they don't make these kind of games anymore. I would like to think that they would fix it up and make it a little more in line with modern expectations, but I sort of doubt that will be the case. I suspect I will still buy it anyway. I have to support a horror game wherever it is found.
Yeah, I'll still buy it.
I have to ask, though, because you two are really big into the genre, what are modern expectations for a horror game? I mean, think about Resident Evil. Take away the puzzle gameplay, take away journeying over the same scenes time and time again. You only have shooting zombies left, or being followed by a zombie. What could they do to modernize that while keeping the core kind of ideas?
I feel like in horror games now, and in a handful of them in the past, I don't know if people have suddenly gotten more of a tolerance for it, you can't fight anyone, or you have a very, very limited ability to fight anyone. So it's like, in Resident Evil, you're not scared of anyone because you have grenades, but in, say, Outlast, you are scared of everyone because they can and will kill you, and there is nothing you can do about it. I don't know if there's a...
Just run.
Yeah, you have to hide. I don't know if there's some happy medium there, but Amnesia's the same way, I think. Amnesia, The Dark Descent, is an excellent PC game, and I don't think you can fight those guys either. I think you just have to hide.
You just have to not go insane.
So do you think that if Capcom announced Resident Evil 7 tomorrow, and it was a first-person horror game in the same vein as Amnesia, that people would be happy, do you think?
I don't know. I really don't know.
I think horror game fans would be excited, and Resident Evil fans would not.
You know what I just thought of? Speaking of not being able to fight back, they're coming out with that new Alien game, and it almost looks like there's not much she's going to be able to do in terms, because it's supposed to be just the one alien, not aliens, so it's kind of like going back to not being able to fight back and just trying to explore. And I mean, I'm not sure if she will be able to fight back eventually, but for the most part, it looked like she didn't have anything to fight back. It was just stay away from the alien. That looked like it has some potential.
Isolation looks fantastic. I'm a big Alien fan, so
That's what it's called.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see what they do with that, because that's a horror game I can get behind. But here's the thing: how do you take that idea, stay away from the alien, and turn it into a 12-hour narrative? Now I know they've already said that there's going to be other humans on there, and you won't be able to trust some of them, and some of them will be trying to kill you, and some of them will want to be your best friend. But that to me takes away a lot of the horror. Unless they're just going to stretch out the cutscenes and they're going to do things like that. Or unless most of the horror is in the cutscenes and they just make it into an alien movie where you can walk around and try and dodge acid occasionally.
Well, here, let's take a little break, and when we come back, we will talk about that point and also just what makes a game scary in general. All right, we'll be right back.
Too many Nazis are being heartlessly slaughtered without a care for their families. I went back there years later, and all the stormtroopers were gone. It was all Starbucks and tanning salons, and I said to myself, this isn't the Hoth I'm looking for.
The zombies are crying.
Over the last year, more than 90% of the world's total deaths have been the deaths of video game characters, mostly Nazis, zombies, and Nazi zombies. Almost every time someone presses the R2 button, a poor human being dies. Hello, I'm Peter Jackson, not the guy who directed the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Actually, I work at a meat processing plant, checking whether the animals we slaughter have been buggered. If they haven't been, well, it's my job to change that. But I'm not here to talk about my glamorous career. I'm here with a few friends to talk about one of the best kept secret massacres in the history of human existence.
Hello, my name is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ben to my friends, and Lily of the Valley to my very best friends. I'm here with Yoda, one of the snot people of Virgin 6, and we're here to talk about the plight of not just the Stormtrooper, but any space-dwelling armed forces operative.
That's right.
It might not seem like it with their stupid white masks and their inability to shoot in a straight line, but Stormtroopers are people.
Well, technically, I think they're clones.
Well, all right, we're here today, either way, to say that enough is enough. No more killing.
Well, maybe a bit of killing.
No, Yoda. No more killing. We've spoke about this.
I said maybe. You don't know what's gonna happen. You've changed, man. You used to love killing stormtroopers.
Well, you might as well know. I'm dating a stormtrooper.
No. No, that can't be true. What happened to the Wookiee you were banging?
It's complicated. He wanted to raise the children Catholic, and I wanted to raise them Jewish. It was a whole thing. Listen, we're getting off subject. I care about stormtrooper rights now.
Yes, I bet you do, you disgusting pervert. You always had a damn thing for uniforms. That's it. I'm out of here. I've had enough. You can turn off the soppy music. I'm out of here.
Is he gone? Doesn't surprise me. He always was a little green drama queen.
Zombie used to be a woman study major at Harvard before being bitten and made obsessed with brains. Why hunt zombie when all zombie want is to stop oppression of women and juicy brain? And it always comes back to the same question. What have the Nazis ever done to deserve this?
So the next time that you sit down at your computer with a sexy glass of mulligatawny soup to play the latest action video game, just think for 2 seconds about the effect that you're having on other people's lives. On the lives of Nazis, on the lives of Russians, zombies, Russian Nazi zombies. Think about that. And join us at hashtag #YesAllGamers, because we know who to blame.
Yes, all gamers.
Yes, all gamers.
Yes, all gamers.
Ja, all gamers. Yes, all gamers.
And we are back. So, Matt's question just before that break was, how do you take a game like the upcoming Alien Isolation, where you are largely unable to defend yourself against something terrifying, and stretch that out into a super long game? That is what's on the table. And sort of more broadly, what makes a game scary just at all? I sort of feel like uncertainty and distrust are the big things, but I don't know how you put those into a game. Surely there's a way. There are smarter people than me making games, but if you can make me uncertain of people's motives and not want to trust people who, you know, I really like playing with the insanity system. I would almost like a game where you see monsters and you have to decide to kill them or not, but they might be just in your head, or maybe it's just like someone walking down the street and your brain thinks it's a monster and you just killed some dude for no reason. That would be quite interesting to me.
Have you ever played Eternal Darkness?
Yeah, I would Lovecraftian video game. Perfect. I'm a big Lovecraft fan, as probably everyone knows.
Yeah, my boyfriend played it, and I watched him play the whole thing. I haven't played it myself yet, but it was a friend of ours who was like obsessed with the game and said, you have to play it. And then he said, I want you to be as insane as possible throughout the entire thing. So like he would purposely like make his sanity level go all the way down, because the best parts of the game were when you would hallucinate. And like he would walk into a room and all of a sudden he couldn't move, and these skeletons started coming and tearing apart his body piece by piece, and then all of a sudden, the room like just flashes, and like he's back to being normal and he's fine, and he's like, what is going on? And then you start just seeing shit that isn't really there, and it's just, oh, it was awesome.
I felt like some of the best ones, and this I think was pretty unique, and they should do it more, were the ones that would break the fourth wall, basically, where it wasn't something happening to the character, but they would sort of troll the player. Because there was one where you had to be paying attention, but at some point on your screen, it looked like a little spider just walked across your screen. And of course, you're typically playing this game in the dark, and so you just think like, oh shit, there's a spider in my room. Like, if you don't like spiders, you have to turn on the lights and look for that fucking spider that you think is loose in your room. And I think that really bothered me at the time, and I didn't realize until later on, oh shit, that was the game. Like, that spider was not real. It just looked like a real shadow of a real spider walking across the corner of the screen. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it's like Metal Gear stuff.
I feel like that game could do with an HD re-release, but Silicon Knights has sort of gone through the ringer. I don't expect to see it anytime soon.
They tried to do something through Kickstarter like twice, and I don't think they got enough money for it.
Yeah, but no one can blame anyone for not wanting to give them money, given that the whole reason that the company originally went bust is because they were ripping people off. I love it that they tried to screw over Epic, and then when they got caught and taken to court and all that, they then just turned around and went, well, maybe the public wants to give us some money.
That is
true.
But
was it the same people?
It was the same people, but it was like the three heads of the studio or something, the exact people who had destroyed their company, basically, by trying to avoid giving Epic money for the Unreal Engine.
I didn't realize it was the same exact people. That's funny.
That could almost be a whole podcast topic for another day, I think. The whole Kickstarter thing and developers asking directly for money after they've criminalized the system before, anyway. But what do you... let's start with Matt, because I feel like, Matt, you don't play a ton of horror games. First of all, tell us why you don't play a ton of horror games, and then what makes a game sort of scary to you.
You know, I've joked in the past about being a coward, but actually, the main reason that I don't play them is because they're so formulaic. I grew up, my dad was huge on Resident Evil, so I saw them all. But once you got to a point, they stopped being horror games and they started being puzzle games, basically. Once you'd gotten a bit of ammo, whatever, that's when it started being less scary. What makes a good horror game is when you haven't got much ammo, and you don't know what's coming. I said before, I think years and years ago, this might have been on the Nonsense Gamer podcast, but that to me, there's nothing in a horror game that's as creepy and as kind of good at getting the adrenaline pumping as in the Metal Gear games, when you're sneaking through and you've either been caught and you're trying to hide so that you don't get seen, or when you're on the really difficult levels, you haven't got your radar, you haven't got anything to let you know when there's people around, and that's when you kind of really listening to the footsteps and things like that. And it seems like it'd be a good way for horror developers to kind of go that kind of stealth where you're one person against loads and you're relatively weak, you haven't got weapons, you haven't got health packs or whatever. That's the way it should go, but it rarely does, because they either have to focus on being quite compact for an indie game because they haven't got the budget, or it has to kind of focus on being a 12-hour adventure or more. So there's not this nice middle ground.
Do you think that The Last of Us is sort of what you're talking about there, or do you think that Joel is too powerful, maybe, to consider it a horror game?
I'd definitely say it's kind of like a thriller almost sometimes. But the bits that you feel helpless against, the bits with where you're sneaking around in the dark, it was too gamey. You could easily just kind of, once you learn, it's like with the original Metal Gear, once you learn to stay out of those cones on the radar, you were going to have no problem with the stealth. Last of Us, I never played it on the hardest difficulty, so maybe it changes when you get up there. But generally, no. I'd say, again, it was a bit thrilling. I'd say it's kind of like a thriller, but perhaps not a horror game.
That's one of those games that I tried to play on the hardest difficulty, and as soon as they take away your ability to do the listening thing, where you can see people making noise and sort of see their outlines, I found it almost impossible. I could not pay enough attention to where people were, and I don't think I made it through like the first hour.
See, that sounds great. Maybe you are right. Maybe it is a horror game in that way. But I guess it comes down to what would you say is a horror game? Not what makes a game scary, but what would differentiate a game that makes you feel like it's a horror even though it's not. Metal Gear is not a horror. Last of Us isn't a horror, although it's got kind of supernatural elements and that sort of thing. So what is a horror? Does it have to have scary monsters? Does it have to be set in the dark?
What do you think about that, Allison?
I mean, I guess you can almost kind of say that each individual person has their own idea of what horror is because everybody's different and different things scare different people. So for somebody, it might just be all you need is dark because they're terrified of the dark. For me particularly, I feel like a horror game is when the game is messing with you. Like those are my favorite kinds where it's just like, you think you saw something, but did you really? You hear sounds and you're like, is the game just making ambient sounds that scare me, or is that actually a monster behind me? Not having, you can have, like, I don't mind having something to attack monsters with, but if it's as long as it's very limiting, or like, just it's not very powerful, or if it's like a gun, like ammo is so scarce, it's like a bullet here or there, just to kind of make the tension high. It's like, do I waste bullets now? Do I run for my life? I don't know, like, just, I kind of like those kinds of games, which is kind of why I was looking forward to Daylight, but then it turned out to be crap, but, that's fine.
I think that horror can be either something that you add in doses to a game, like you could have a game that's an action game with horror elements, like you say, Last of Us is probably sort of like a thriller with maybe light horror elements. But I think if you want to call your game a horror game, it has to invest a large part of its like resources towards the goal of scaring you. And my example would be in Outlast, almost the entire game is pitch black. You can only see things through your night vision camera, and you have to constantly find batteries to reload it. So there's a danger of being trapped in the dark, and using that night vision doesn't give you that great of a field of vision anyway, or whatever. So your perceptions are limited. That's part one. You can't fight anyone. You're just some random guy. So anyone who sees you, you're scared of them because they can and will hurt you and kill you. Then there's the setting, which is like in Resident Evil, some place is destroyed and overrun by the monsters who destroyed it. That's sort of inherently scary to people. Outlast is the overrun asylum. I don't know anybody who would say a crazy old asylum that the inmates have basically taken over because of supernatural ghosts or whatever isn't scary. So I feel like that's inherently scary to people. That's why they go to, any sort of like, this place is haunted. Let's go to the Rock in San Francisco. It's totally haunted by ghosts or whatever. That's just, there's a fear to people about that.
Were you one of the voice actors in the original Resident Evil?
I should have been, except I was probably, 11 years old, so it would have been like, oh my god, I'm so scared of these ghosts. But the thing that Outlast did the best, in my opinion, and that any horror game should aspire to, if you want to scare people, is the sound design. That game, it would be largely silent, but then they would hit these notes at just the right moment. Movies do it now too, where they build this through the music, they build this tension, and then they hit it with this note, but nothing happens. And then a second later, after you've cooled down, then they hit you with the scare, and it's like, to me, that gets me every time, even if you know it's going to happen. That will still scare the shit out of you. And the thing that Outlast did the best was, if your character thought there was scary shit around, the way he reacted, like his haggard breathing was so real to me. If you're sitting in the dark with that guy breathing in your ear like he's about to have a heart attack, or he really thinks there's a murderer with a knife like feet away. Yeah, it's good. It was really well done. And ultimately, I feel like that game was just okay. I mean, if somebody with a huge budget and those same ideas could really make a really good game, and I liked Outlast anyway. But yeah, to me, that's it. If you want to be called a horror game, you have to invest a significant number of your resources towards the goal of scaring the player.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got kind of two more questions. The first is, where do we sit on Deadly Premonition? Because that's a game that is, yeah, that is definitely a horror, but which handles light and dark so well in that there's maybe half of the game where you wouldn't even know it was a horror. If you just saw the cutscenes from, say, the first 5 or 6 hours, you probably wouldn't know it was a horror. But then there's these bits that are very dark. Now, yeah, I know the game's terrible, but the story's fantastic.
No, it's not. It's
It
fantastic.
is. It's terrible. The gameplay itself
No.
is dreadful. My God.
Okay, well, the gameplay, yeah, a little bit.
But, and my second question, which is completely unrelated, but which I suppose we can come back round to. I don't want to forget it, so I'm just putting it out there. How do you think virtual reality is going to change it? I remember with Manhunt, there was a peripheral or something with the Xbox 360 where you could use a microphone and it'd measure your breathing. And if you was too loud, then you'd alert enemies. Do you think that's the kind of thing that's going to be used in the future? Do you think it's going to really take off and it's going to help revive the horror genre as things like Oculus Rift and Sony's device come to retail?
As far as Deadly Premonition, excellent. That game was awesome. Like you say, the gameplay was kind
Yes.
of bad, but the game, that's going to be one of those games that, like, in a few years, or maybe they've already done it, people will write the title, The Greatest Game You Never Played, Deadly Premonition, because nobody gave a shit. Although, I still think that game was pretty surprisingly and disarmingly good for how bad it was. I would play it again.
Yes. Yes. It's a cult classic.
But do you think it was good horror?
I mean, the first time you see like the enemies when you're like in the darker world or whatever, I mean, yeah, they were kind of scary at first, and they move really weird, like they bend over backwards and then kind of walk towards you. It's like this very, kind of disturbing way of walking, but like you had a gun and you shot them, so I mean, after a while, it didn't become scary for me anymore. It was only like the kind of that first sort of initial, what the hell is this? What are these things that are coming at me? And they kind of put in a couple of situations where they try to scare you and stuff. But I don't know if it's just because it's just my opinion, but I mean, it's harder for me to say that's straight up horror. It's more of a thriller for me, I guess.
I think that what you should lean on if you're thinking of that game more as a horror game is not so much the monsters, because whatever, like, they're just creepy guys and you shoot them. But it's more like, if you're the kind of person who's going to get invested, you are the kind of person who could get invested in the strange town and the quirky characters and then not want to see them get hurt by crazy monsters or whatever else. So, like, if you were willing to go there with the game and be a part of the world, it was probably more of a horror game. But otherwise, it was probably just like, what the fuck is going on here?
See, the reason I put that up is because that game is like 25 hours, and the way that they stretched it out is that the horror sequences were very, very short. You had the thing in the lumber mill where you was being chased by the killer, and you had to hide in a locker or underneath a desk or something, and you had to hold your breath as he went by. And there weren't that many monsters to face, but it was always, you kept bumping into the killer and having to run away. And then there's these huge chunks where it's just like you're sitting in a diner eating a sandwich or whatever. So it was this interesting contrast between the two, and that's how they managed to make it last 20 hours or more.
I think that's what it is, though, is you either have to make a short game where you are firing on all cylinders to scare a person the entire time, or you can have the juxtaposition between, like, something really scary, but then it's made more scary by the fact that you get a glimpse at normal life. You get to go and just have a coffee whatever, like, oh, these people are cool or whatever. This is a nice little town, and then all of a sudden a killer shows up, and it's like, oh shit, you have to run away and hide. So I think it can work either way. I should say, done well, it can work either way. Done poorly, it can be garbage, no matter how you try to spin it.
Just like Deadly Premonition.
Hey.
And what was your other question? I've forgotten it for some reason.
Yeah, I almost did. About virtual reality and Oculus Rift and Sony's device, whatever that's called, I forget, and how that's going to help or hinder the horror genre. Because the obvious thing to go for would be, can you imagine Amnesia, but in 3D and played with surround sound and all that sort of thing, but in a very tight kind of mask almost. But then at the same time, how long can developers kind of utilize Amnesia and its format? How long is that going to remain scary, even if the format is very close in 3D?
I think that the Oculus Rift will definitely have an impact for horror games, just because it forces you, it forces immersion on you. You can't just look away from the screen and see reality around you. You turn your head and you're turning your head in the game. So it's kind of like it's just a more immersive experience overall. I mean, to your question about how long can they keep going with it, I'm not really sure, because I mean, it's just like, it's such a new thing, and it's like, it's not even like completely commercialized and all that, but just the idea itself does really seem like it'll be a huge benefit, particularly for horror games, just because it's just like, you're there, no matter which way you look, it's gonna be horror game. And if they, if developers utilize that in the right way, it'll probably be downright terrifying.
Yeah, I would say that there is definitely potential there, and actually I want to talk about that because Allison just gave me a crazy idea. But once you're wearing that thing on your head, it doesn't seem that crazy to me that they could then start to quantify the rest of what's going on with you. Like, if you're wearing the helmet, you're already going to look ridiculous, so go all the way. Wear a thing where it's going to monitor your breathing, wear something that's going to monitor your pulse, and make a game that can track it and almost tailor the scares to you. It would be difficult, but it would be terrifying. And the thing that Allison made me, what do you think? That'd be crazy, right? If they could do it.
I was just thinking the potential for something like Left 4 Dead with something like that, where the levels are almost randomly generated in terms of when you're attacked and what you're attacked by. Can you imagine the kind of what they could do with that sort of information, heart rate and breathing rate and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that would be
that'd be incredible.
Excellent. Here's the point that I was going to make, and we can wrap on this, is what Allison, you were talking about. Once you've got that helmet on, you look around, you're in horror game, you can't get away or whatever, and how scary that is. But now, think about Eternal Darkness. I said the scariest thing, or not necessarily the scariest, but the coolest, the most interesting thing, was when they broke the fourth wall. Now, if you do that, you've got this thing on your head. Can the game developer make you think that there is something not in the game, but in your room with you, that you would be scared of if only you could see, but you can't because you have this fucking thing on your head? I think I'd have a heart attack. That, to me, sounds really scary, and I think it would probably give someone a heart attack, and then they would have to shut it down.
Yeah, they'd like recall the game because a guy died or something. And then it becomes this myth that like is just passed down throughout gaming history.
That would be fantastic though, because didn't that used to be kind of a way of advertising films like Evil Dead? Wasn't there someone that was supposed to have died in the cinema because it was so scary, and then all of a sudden people are going to watch the horror film that someone died while they were watching it?
Oh yeah, with horror films they do shit like that all the time. To me, yeah, so that would be scary to me. I don't know how they could do it, but I would bet that someone has already had that idea and is figuring out how it would work. I want to play the horror game that is so unnerving I have to turn it off and not come back. Like, I would really like to play that game. I'd be annoyed I spent my money on it, but I would be so excited that they managed it. Well, I think we'll probably maybe talk about more horror games in the future. It's not really the kind of thing you can compress into an hour, so sometime it'll come back around. But for this week, I think we covered a pretty good portion of horror stuff and things for horror fans of horror games, whatever. Thanks for joining me, gentlemen and lady.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Which one am I?
I feel like it should be obvious by now.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that is it for us. We'll be back next week with another episode. And thank you. We are out.